Okay, so for today, we're going to have a discussions of the architecture roadmap, no? So the architecture roadmap lists no individual increments of change and lays them out on a timeline to show progression from the baseline architecture to the target architecture. So the architecture roadmap forms a key component of transitions architecture and incrementally developed through phase B, C, D, E, and F within the ADM. So the purpose of the document of the architecture is to define one or more architecture roadmap for the relevant domain and subdomain. We need to take note that the roadmap may also need be synchronized with wide program or project plans or more strategic roadmaps. And the role of current planning functions will determine the level of detail and breadth and information on the architecture roadmap. And care should be taken to minimize the duplication of effort and content in order to produce plans and roadmaps. And to give us more details about the topic, let us all welcome our presenter. Go ahead, ma'am.
Okay po, sir. Thank you for that introduction po. And yeah, let's start now po. Good morning po everyone. My name is Katrina and I'm going to discuss lesson number 9, which is developing an architecture transition roadmap. So we are familiar with roadmap naman. So when we say roadmap, we're going to start from one point going up to a certain point. Di po ba? So we'll learn that here. Let me show you first the chapter overview. So here in this chapter, chapter 9, it discusses the development of an EA or Enterprise Architecture Management Plan. So management plan, which is the document that describes how an enterprise will manage the transition from the current process going to the future, current process and resources to those which will be needed in the future. So yeah, roadmap siya from current to future siya. So this transition from the current EA structure and the future EA structure is an ongoing activity as the new resources are implemented and therefore become part of the current architecture. The purpose of configuration management and version control are also discussed, along with the need to provide a sequence for implementation projects. So that's the overview. Next is the objectives. We have four main objectives. First is we will understand the purpose of the EA management plan, and I'll give you some example format of an EA management plan because again, this is a document, and understand the types of content that go into an EA management plan, as well as understand the purpose of summaries of the current and future architecture. Introduction to Enterprise Architecture Management Plan. So, since I mentioned that this is a document, a document plan, uh, this plan or this document will help us to see the business, the performance gaps in the business, the resource requirements, so these things. Plan solution, sequencing plan, summary of the current and future architecture, governance process, implementation methodology, and documentation framework. So these following this list will be discussed later in detail later. Now, the role of the management plan, it provides us an overview or a better look for the coordination and support sa changes between the current and future views. Like for example, this picture, I have an image here and the slides showing the current architecture as well as the future architecture. Sa current architecture, we have the goals and initiatives. So ito yung goal, ano bang gustong ma-aim ng business currently and what is its current products and services and the current data and information they have, as well as systems and application that they are currently using, as well as their networks and infrastructure. Of course, nothing's permanent naman in the business. Also, it needs change. Nothing's permanent but change. It also needs improvement. So this will serve as like the starting, the beginning point going to the future pagka nagkaroon na ng mga improvements. So from your goal and initiatives, it will be updated strategic goals and initiatives. Nagbabago rin yan. Depende sa needs ng customer or depende sa situation, like for example sa pandemic, 'di ba, ang daming nagbago ron. So marami ring business na nagbago yung goals and initiatives as well as the products and services din. Ito kasama rin yan. When you change your goals, also nag-update din sa products. You are going to improve your products and services or else mapag-iwanan ka sa market. Maraming competitors like that. And enhance data and information flows, integrated systems and application, optimize networks and infrastructure. So, in short, this image is just showing us the transition from the current architecture to the future architecture, so that we can imagine what's happening pa. Okay. Now, the enterprise architecture management plan, it has four main parts. The first part is the EA project program management. Second part is current architecture summary. Third part is the EA future architecture summary. In part four, basically the glossary and the references. Parang book lang, di ba? At the end, merong glossary and reference. The main parts are part 1 to 3. Additional lang yung for part 4. Each part consists of different not really topic of concepts, and I'm going to discuss this one by one. So let's start with the part 1, which is the EA program management. So EA is a management program. It supports policy development, decision making, and the effective, efficient use of resources. So more on a policy. Sa policy na nangyayari sa business, the EA program management section documents the activities associated with administering EA as an ongoing program. Under this part, we have the first category is the governance and principles 1.1. So this section, it documents the way that policy and decision making will occur within the EA program. It is also where the underlying principles of the EA program are articulated. EA governance is perhaps best described through a narrative that provides EA program policy and an accompanying flow chart that shows how and when decisions are made on issues such as IT investment proposals, project reviews, document approvals, and standard adoption waivers. EA principles articulate the enterprise value as they relate to the enterprise architecture. So, merong flow chart. So, as I mentioned, governance and principles sa mga decision making here. Specifically, when it comes to IT department, merong mga specific person na nakakapag-approve ng document, merong mga hindi allowed for that one. Siyempre, yung mga nakakapag-approve is yung authorized. So, sila yung nasa on top. They are on top of the flow chart or the organizational chart nila. These principles then guide the EA program's establishment and management. Examples of the EA principle are the degree to which the enterprise promotes the open sharing of information. Next is an emphasis on stakeholder participation. Third, recognition that IT is normally a means and not the end itself. And an emphasis on using commercial products that are based in an open standard, as well as recognition that EA adds value for planning, decision making, and communication. So basically, this will help to settle, not really settle, but um, overall flow din ng business. This one is related to that one. Governance and principles. I hope medyo clear. Di ko mabuti yung best example, but yeah, that's how I understand it. Next po is 1.2, support for strategy and business. So this section emphasized that one of the main purpose of the EA program is to support and improve the enterprise strategic and business planning, as well as to identify performance gaps that EA components can help close. By showing how EA components are being currently used and identifying useful new processes and technologies, each level of the framework, improvements in performance can occur that are captured in the future EA views. So for EA components to be viewed as a strategic asset and the EA be viewed as part of the strategic planning process, the business executives must see the values of the EA program in supporting the outcomes that matter to them. It is therefore important to show the linkage of the EA program to the accomplishment of the enterprise strategic goals, as well as to clearly show how the EA components support line of business activities. So more on support sa business, support for strategy, ano ba yung ikai-improve ng business, yung mas ikai-improve pa nila, dito siya pumapasok sa documentation nito. And to avoid the performance gaps then, maybe they are doing it now pero hindi pala siya effective. So how can they handle, how can they support that pa? Next is the EA roles and responsibilities. So this section documents the roles that stakeholders in the EA program will play and what the responsibilities associated with those roles will be. This is where the players on the EA team are also identified. So I have here on the right side a table format. This one is an effective way to show the roles and responsibilities of a person. You see, we have here the position, we have sponsor, line of business managers, architects, data architects. Ito yung position nila. So, sa ang team ang role nila sa team pagka sponsor, so more on sa leadership, tapos ano bang nahe-help niya sa team, be the champion of the EA program in resolving high level EA issues. So, pangmataasang issues na yung sa kanya. Siguro yung mga low level issues, doon lang yun sa mga mas mababang position din. We have here webmaster, research analyst. So itong isa, research analyst ang position niya. So sa team, ano bang role niya sa team? So requirement analysis, nag-analyze ng requirements for the business, and ang ginagawa niya yung detailed na ginagawa niya is he documents and verify LOB or line of business and end user requirements, assist in EA component design and documentation activities. So basically, this table will show us the person, the position of the person, the role, yung role nila sa team, and then kung ano yung eksaktong ginagawa nila sa team. Ano yung ambag nila sa team. Parang ganun. Next is the EA program budget. So this section on the documents, the EA document provides the budget for the fiscal year. So fiscal year po siya. And over the total life cycle so that the total cost of ownership is identified. While the EA program is ongoing, a life cycle period of 5 years is recommended to be able to calculate. In general, the costs to be included are those for EA program startup and operation, salaries and work facilities for the EA team, the initial documentation of the EA, periodic updates to the EA, development of the EA management plan, EA tool purchase and support, repository development and maintenance. The initial estimate of this cost represents the baseline for the EA program funding. Spending during the life cycle should be tracked against the baseline to promote effective management of the EA program if changes in the scope of the EA program occurs. A corresponding change in the funding baseline should also be made. So budgeting. In short, budgeting. Dito natin makikita lahat from the tools, salaries, and work facilities na ginagamit sa business. Dito siya naka-breakdown and also naka-foresee siya for 5 years, no? Why? Para um for future reference din, no? Pero that will be updated din. Meron kasi silang tinatawag na baseline. Yun yung parang sinusunod nila. And if yung baseline ay nagbago, so yung funding rin is magche-change. So basically, in short, yeah, basically more on budgeting, money terms under this section sa EA management plan document, money matters. Next is program performance measures. So in this section, documents, it show how the effectiveness and efficiency of the EA program will be measured. As was described in the previous chapters, there are two types of measure. First is the outcome. Next is the output. When we say outcome, it measures identify progress being made towards some new end state, such as better EA component integration, increased application and user satisfaction, or more effective IT investment decision making. So, outcome, result. Output, while the second category, which is the output, it measures the provide data on activities and things, such as how many databases exist, how many email are sent each day, or how closely an IT project is meeting baseline estimates for cost or schedule or performance. So for the outcome, it measures both quantitative and qualitative elements. So yung mga quantity, quality elements sa outcome yon. For the output naman, usually, focus siya sa quantitative. That's why here on the example you see, it's asking how many database, how many email, how closely. So yun yung difference nilang dalawa. So sa outcome based, so of course, beside numbers, it also papasok din dito yung quality and numbers. Yan. Performance measures. So we're done now with all the sections under the part 1. Now let's move on to the sections under part 2, which is the current architecture summary. So one of the purpose of this of the management plan is to show an overview of the linkage between the current EA components and products as at each level of framework. In this way, the present role of IT within the enterprise is better understood and can be further analyzed from either a top-down or a bottom-up perspective. So, more on overview ng business framework, current situation. That's why it's called current architecture. Okay. Under current architecture, we have strategic goals and initiatives. If you remember the picture that I showed earlier, diba ito yung una, strategic goals and initiatives. So here, this section, it identifies how the EA program and specific components support the attainment of the enterprise strategic goals and initiatives. In this section, it builds upon comments provided in the strategic plan and is included to more clearly show how EA components and strategic initiatives are involved in each strategic goal area. A general description is then provided of how IT components support each goal and initiative at the strategic initiatives level of the EA3 Cube framework. So let's take a look at the picture because it provides an example format of an artifact that maps EA components to the enterprise architect's strategic goals and initiatives. So the goal of the enterprise or the business is to be the number one in product service because of course they are competitors and their goal is to be number one against their competitors as well as increase safety. Now, for the initiative, these are the things that you need to do in order to achieve your goal. Okay. So for how are we going to be number one in the product service? So maybe we can create new customer service website and upgrade of customer service database. So either you create new or you upgrade or improve whatever is it's existing in your business. For increased safety, new assembly line safety features. So it's still connected to the goal. Of course, should be connected, diba? More on safety. Now, supporting EA components. So how are you going to uh, develop or create a website ba? What do you need? These are the things that you need. You need new service website, database, product parts, customer database, PCs and laptops, of course, and then the sales database. So you see, what do you call that one? From top to bottom, or from detail, from basic to detailed, the goal, it's being broken down, you see, from the goal, and then what are your plans in order to achieve your goal, and now ito medyo detailed na what are the things you need. So basically yun lang siya, goal, initiative, and supporting components. So dapat naka-summary siya sa document management plan, because ito yung gagamitin for the future. Ay, nakapag tapos na pala tayo sa goal na to. Kumbaga, we are finished with this one. We already have customer website. Na-upgrade na rin natin yung database. We are done with this. So let's think of a new initiative naman for the next year, for the future. Yan po. Next is business services and information flows. So in this section, it identifies and emphasizes the role that EA plays in supporting business process analysis and improvement, as well as identifying and optimizing information flows within and between these processes. It also reaffirms the EA principle that EA components are a means to enable effective business services and should not be procured unless there is a strong business case that supports investment. Within the section, the enterprise main LOBs, or line of business, should be listed along with the key business services and associated information flows in each LOB. A general description is then provided of how IT components support each key business process at the business service level of the EA framework. Detailed diagrams of information flows and data structures are also provided using the various types of artifacts that populate the information flow level. For example, is the mga ERD, entity relation diagram. So if you remember yung mga ginagawa nating documentation kay Sir Alain before last sem, ERD, 'di ba? We are connecting the flows sa database, data flow diagrams, object-oriented diagrams. So those are the figures that we can include under this section sa documentation. Next is 2.3, systems and application. So this section identifies how current components and artifacts at the systems and application level, the EA3 Cube framework, support the information flows that are required for LOBs throughout the enterprise. The discussion should summarize how well this suite of commercial and custom developed IT systems and front and back offices services provide the functionality that enterprise needs for LOB operations and the office automation. This can range from large-scale multimodal ERP solutions to commercial applications and databases to small custom-developed websites. Comments should focus on degree of integration, potential scalability, user satisfaction, and any reliance on proprietary solutions. So basically, systems and application na nag-exist na we have sa enterprise. So, it can be a large scale, depende kung gaano kalaki yung enterprise mo. And you have ERP din, mga databases, of course, and website. Kasi, and yung application mismo ng mga nagtatrabaho. Kasi, as of now, I think, I'm not sure kung meron pa ba na paperless, but sa office parang automated na kasi lahat. Siguro meron pa ring paperworks, pero na minimize na siguro 'yon. Kasi more on automated na nga. Next po is 2.4 technology infrastructure. So in this section discusses the voice, the data, and the video, EA components and artifacts that made up the technology infrastructure. The discussion should focus on how well these internal and external network systems are. Cable plans integrate to create a seamless infrastructure. Comments should also be made on how well the infrastructure currently handles the transport of voice, data, video, and mobile information in terms of reliability, scalability, and cost efficiency. So more on technology but nagpo-focus siya sa voice, data, and video. Why? Because nowadays, yun na yung mga data na ginagamit natin in exchange. 'Di ba? Voice, when it comes to call, you are going to call client, inbound, outbound, data, when you process data, and video, siguro sa video meetings, ganon, call, and mobile information. So how strong is your technology infrastructure ba? So yun yung dito siya madidetect. Next is IT security. So in this section, it discusses the general approach to IT security at all levels of the EA framework. IT security should be part of any strategic goal or initiative that depends on accurate, properly authenticated information. High level descriptions are provided on how security is built into business services and then control of information flows, as well as the design and operation of systems, services, and networks. Specific IT security information should not be part of the EA management plan because it could reveal vulnerabilities. This type of information should be documented in a separate IT security plan that only certain people in the enterprise have access to. Of course, it's just saying na you can pag magdo-document ka ng IT security, maybe the yung overview lang, not detailed. If you're going to make it detailed, you should separate it, and yun na yung magiging IT security plan, pero dapat onti lang yung may access doon sa detailed IT security plan na yun. Hindi mo siya pwedeng ilagay overall here under this section kasi um, risk. I can say risk, ganun. Pag nalaman ng tao na hindi part ng IT, ganito pala yung ginagawa nila, ganito pala nila, ano siya, high risk siya into hacking, ano pa ba, baka mapasok yung system or what. So that's very, what do you call that word? Sensitive information when it comes to IT security. What you can include in this part of document is, I think, the overview. Pero yung detailed na IT security plan, hindi siya dito nilalagay. It's a separate document, and people under IT are the only person who can access that. Next is the EA standards. The standard section documents the technical standards reference model, also known as the TSRM, which provides the EA standard for voice, data, video, and IT security that are used during the EA component development. The TSRM can also provide a list of preferred vendors and products that meet the technical standards that an enterprise adopts. The EA standards are a key element of the configuration management or CM process and come from international, national, local government, industry, and enterprise sources. Selected standards should include standards for voice, data, and video technologies from leading standards bodies throughout the world, including the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, or the IEEE, the National Institute Science of Technology, that's the NIST, this one. The International Enterprise for Standardization, we know that about the ISO. The European Committee on Standardization, the CEN or CEN, and the Federal Enterprise Architecture. So, meaning to say, you cannot just use kung anong trip mong application or technology for your voice, data, video security, it should have standards. And dapat pasok yun sa ISO standard, IE standard, NIC standard, and then the local standard. Dapat parang may checklist. Okay? You cannot use why do we need standard ba? Of course, this is more on business. You don't want the other people to access your data like this if you're going to use puchu applications, 'di ba? Yun, leak to avoid information leak. So you need to use an application or systems na pasok sa mga standards nila. EA standards. Next is the workforce requirements. Workforce skill requirements. And this section describes the approach to IT workforce planning and training that the enterprise uses in human capital management. People are often the most valuable resource an enterprise has. An IT workforce plan should detail training requirements for EA component operations, support, and new development projects at all levels of the framework. So I agree when I mention na people are the most valuable resources ng isang enterprise, ng isang business. Of course, how is it going to work ba? Yung business mo if you don't have people, you don't have workforce. Yeah, unless you have robots. But I don't think lahat magagawa ng robot, especially HR jobs, accounting jobs, 'di ba? Computer can be, pero need pa rin ng human interaction. So, workforce requirements, the enterprise should provide training din sa mga employees nila. So that's part 2. We're done with that one. Next is part 3, future architecture summary. So basically, part 1 and part 2 talks about the current architecture. Now, so here's a part 3. I'm going to discuss the future naman. So let's start with future operating scenarios. So in this section, the future operating scenarios are presented along with a narrative description of the purpose of the scenarios and the spectrum of operating environments that the scenarios respond to. For example, 3 scenarios. Look, we have 3 scenarios here. 3 scenarios are presented with an opening narrative that explain that they represent. Scenario 1, continuing with the status quo. Paano ba banggitin to? Scenario 2, an aggressive business strategy in a good market environment. Scenario 3, a defensive business strategy during a market downturn. Each scenario has a planning assumptions to build into it that highlight changes that will need to occur in processes, people, technology. Lastly, in this section, a description is provided of the selected course of action for the enterprise. Future scenario will be pursued because a good business environment is forecast for the next several years. So future operating scenarios. So more on narrative report, you are providing specific scenario. What if ganito mangyari? Anong solution dyan? Or paano natin masosolve to if this happen, these scenarios happen? Let's say, for example, we have this scenario in the future. Paano gagawin natin? Parang ganun. Nagre-ready sila. It's like they're creating a backup plan to this scenarios, future scenarios, related to the business operation, of course. Next is planning assumptions. The planning assumptions from the scenarios are further discussed in terms of what they mean to the priorities of the enterprise as it implements the future EA. The assumptions identify new capabilities and resources that will be needed if the enterprise is to be successful in each scenario. This section then focuses on the selected scenario and the planning assumptions that will underline that course of action. Continuing the example earlier, if future scenario number 2, yung kanina, is being pursued, then several new e-commerce system may need to be built and new manufacturing capacity supported. The planning assumptions that were identified in the first phase, yung kanina, 3.1, become the guidepost for decisions about how to change the current EA, which needs to be described. So, connected siya dun sa 3.1 kanina, planning assumption. So, let's say, merong mga scenario doon na possible nga mangyari. So, we need to plan for that one. Dito siya papasok. Planning assumption. So, assumption pa rin kasi yung gumagawa nito, yung nagdo-document nito, dapat in the future future thinking. So, assumption. So, ito pwede natin gawin like that. Next is updating current and future views. Documentation of plan changes in processes and resources is what creates the future views of the EA at all levels of the framework. Using the EA framework as an example, these updates should be accomplished in a top-down manner to preserve the emphasis of strategy and business, and to maintain the logic of the documentation relationship. Therefore, these updates will begin with the enterprise strategic goals and initiatives. So, documenting the changes to the flow information within and between business services. So, basically, here, since this part 3 is more on future, future views ng enterprise, dito na ginagawa yung pag-update ng current and future views. Going back dun sa picture na I showed you earlier, yung current view tsaka future view, since you have the idea na ng current view and you need to do some changes, dito mo na siya gagawin. You need to update that here. Next is sequencing plan. So the sequencing plan sections of the EA management plan documents the task, milestones, and time frame for implementing the EA components and artifacts. For the large and mid-size business, they often have many new development, upgrade, retirement, or migration projects underway kasi malaking business sila eh. Mas malaking business, maraming improvements at any given time, and this require coordination to establish the optimal sequencing of activities. Sometimes there are dependencies between projects that also require proper sequencing. For example, an improvement to the capacity of the data infrastructure may be required before additional systems or databases can be effectively hosted so that maximum performance can be attained. So sequencing plan, as I mentioned earlier, kung large scale or mid scale yung business mo, marami ka ring improvements na gagawin. Pero those improvements, sometimes they are connected with one another. You cannot proceed with project A. Let's say project A or system A. I mean, you cannot complete this intranet system if yung system A is system B is not integrated. They are connected. That means you cannot move on to the next step if the previous step is not yet finished. That's why we have sequencing plan. So you'll know the correct sequence, the correct order. What are the project? What are the first project, second project, third project that you need to do muna ba? Sequencing. So meaning should be in order, the projects. Hindi pwede mag-jump. Ay, ito muna gawin natin. Tapos ito. Or else, baka magulo lang yung infrastructure. So, of course, you need to plan it. Configuration management. So the EA configuration management or CM section of the EA management plan serves to support the sub-process by which changes to the EA are managed and the standards in the TSRM are applied. Changes to the EA include the addition, upgrade, retirement of the EA components. Wait lang po. Or artifacts. The CM ensures that a standard process is used in reviewing proposed changes. Technical standards for voice, data, and video are followed or waived. So we discussed this na kanina na yung mga standards ng ating information. There is a documented waiver process. Waivers have specified time limits so that the EA standards are eventually realized. There is an improvement for EA documentation. Version control. Of course, you are updating from time to time. You need to control the versions. The CM process should be overseen by the chief architect and be supported by an architecture working group that includes the stakeholders from throughout the enterprise. So merong mga dedicated persons for this one. Hindi basta-basta, hindi kung sino-sino lang. Para rin yung kanina na yung sa decision making. Merong flow chart who are the persons in high position na can approve. So ito yung example document po. Enterprise architecture change request form. If you are going to do some changes sa current, it needs to be approved by those who are authorized to approve. Ayan. So we're done with part 3. Let's move on to the last part, which is the glossary and the reference. So for the glossary, this part of the EA management plan is where a glossary of EA terms is provided. So glossary, more on terminology. If you're not familiar with terminology, this term, that term, you can find it under the glossary. What else ba? Yeah, terminology, acronyms, mga ganun. There should be a bibliographical list of reference books and articles that might provide additional background or that help the readers understand the EA management plan, because the EA is still an emerging area of professional practice. The acronym list and glossary are helpful in creating a common set of terms and definition for use throughout the enterprise. So, for example, nagkaroon ng access yung not really low level, no, mid level or low level sa management plan, sa architecture plan, and he cannot understand this or that. Pwede niyang tignan dito sa glossary and references. So, summary for this chapter, summary of concepts. So, the overall, this chapter provided us a description of the purpose, format, and the content of an EA management plan. So, it shows us an overview how management plan, the document looks like. This plan describes the EA management process, implementation methodology, and documentation framework, as well as the summaries of the current and future views. Ito yung pinaka-importante sa plan na to yung current and future views. It is a living document that is updated at regular intervals to provide clear version control for changes in current and future views of the EA components and artifacts at each level of the framework. So, itong document na to, hindi siya forever. It is being updated. Merong versions. But of course, you cannot update it without the authorized person approving it. So, medyo tedious siyang trabaho. The EA management plan should be archived in the online EA repository to support easy access to the information and promote linkage of the EA program to other IT management process. So, ini-store itong document na to or plan na to sa repository ng business para ma-access ng mga department na may kailangan sa document na yun. For example, yung IT department, they need to take a look on the current and future framework ng business before they make their IT projects. Ganun po. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much po. I hope ay natutunan kayo.
Okay, so thank you very much, Madam. No? Again, in this topic, we are also always consider determining and confirming the key corporate change attributes. No? We need to study the requirements, no, in gaps identified in the phase B, C, and D, and then deduce implementation factors by completing the implementation factor assessment. We need also to review and consolidate gap analysis results by fill in the consolidate gaps, solutions, and dependencies matrix. We need to accept the fact that gaps are different between the baseline and target architecture. So fill in the matrix of gaps and solutions. We need to have to consider the architecture domain, like business, application, information. By identifying the gap, description of difference between the baseline and target architecture, for instance, an integration of CRM systems. For potential solutions, the possible measures to take in order to address the gap, and dependencies to determine the dependencies between domains by considering the relationship of the elements in the different architectural domain. Another thing is identify and group major work packages. Identify and organize major project activities as work packages with the use of work breakdown structure. I think you are still familiar with the WBS. WBS is a hierarchical description of the work that must be done to complete the deliverables. So each descending level in the work breakdown structure represent an increasingly detailed descriptions in the project of course in the project deliverables the detail of the work packages include the definition, deliverables, cost, resource needs and milestone. Another step is identify transition architecture. You need to draw a diagram to show the baseline, target, and transition architecture. So kailangan nating i-consider 'yon, Wait. Then another, of course, as I mentioned, you can draw an Archimate diagram, if you are still remember during your software engineering. This will be the outline or roadmap, show the various architecture in gap analysis. So I will give you an example of a model architecture outcome for each architecture used at the same time. Okay, then another thing, of course, is the transition roadmap, that shows timeline of the progression and from the baseline to a target architecture. So it is also important to consider because we need to present the scheduling of work packages in a migration roadmap, which in turn present a timeline of the progression from the baseline architecture to the target architecture. So part of the roadmap or yung diagram na sinasabi natin has been created for your based on the work packages and transition architecture identified. So we need to perform, of course, different steps or procedures for that architecture. And I think you're also familiar with the example of a Gantt chart, So most commonly kasi in Gantt chart, we just simply design the beginning and end. But we need to consider the milestone, of course, in a Gantt chart. Okay? So I think that's it for Madam Katrina Tafik. Okay?